records when it finishes.
So do people actually see it backwards like that?
No, it shows up backwards on our screen.
Okay.
We're not sure why, but it shows up the right ways on the recording.
That's right.
I assume there's something to do with Google Hangouts and like the idea that you're looking at yourself, you want to see it as a mirror, but I don't know.
It's interesting.
Hangout?
Yeah, this is basically WebEx, so we're picking up the camera feed, which we're using to just pick up the projector indirectly. So we're running the recording through there. Let's make sure our content is still working. Yeah. So content's on. No, content. There we go. That's better. Alright, so that one's thing we do. Not the best, especially when people forget to turn it off, but we've been better about it lately. So. So the last thing we need to do is be set up aside from the so whenever you're done. Okay.
So I take out.
Yeah, I think we're all set. So if you could just clip that on your collar.
They're really close? Okay.
It has a pretty good range. So
That's pretty good?
That's going to be fine. And then you can drop that in your pocket.
Yep.
Sonny, Stuart, Lori.
You probably know almost all the rest are, you know Adrian, right?
Lori.
Not Adrian? Adrian Porterfeld.
I'll be up front. If you guys need
He was a Dave Wagner student at Berkeley, and has been at Google for a year or two now.
Yeah. Okay, you ready to go?
Yep.
And is this on? Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome to this week's DTech seminar. Again, an announcement for those of you who are not on a regular mailing list, if you go here to http://DTechNYC, you can sign up to our mailing list to get informed of upcoming talks, as well as see the recordings, as well as slides from previous talks that we've had. So be sure to sign up and feel free to send that on to your colleagues who might be interested. Today we're lucky to have Rob Reeder. Luckily, Rob didn't have to go too far. Rob's with Google and is in the same building, so that was kind of nice. Rob has been here with Google only for about a year, working in usable security and privacy, which he's been doing throughout his career. Prior to this, he was at Microsoft for 4.5 years, working in the same areas, and before that, he did his PhD at Carnegie Mellon, working with Lori Craner, who's a very well-known person in this general area, especially privacy. So without further ado, Rob.
Thanks, James. Yeah, so I asked Google if they'd pay my travel expenses to come down one floor. No luck there. Yeah, so as James mentioned, I've been working in usable security in industry since I finished my PhD in 2008, and I was at Microsoft for 4.5 years. I'm now at Google, and I'm going to be talking about some work I've done over the last several years at both companies, which is why I have collaborators from a number of different institutions on this work. So at these two companies, I've had responsibility for making security more usable for the users of Microsoft and Google's products. And one aspect of usable security that I've worked on quite a bit are security warnings. So this is an assortment of security warnings of the type you might see in your software. And actually, I'm curious for the people in the live audience here, who has seen one of these warnings or something like this? Okay, everyone knows what I'm talking about then. Okay, cool. So warnings can be really important. I'm talking today especially about security warnings. So these are things that may stand in between users and malware or users and phishing attacks, or between users and man-in-the-middle attacks where someone may listen in on their confidential conversations. So they can be really important and give users critical opportunities to avoid falling for security problems. But sometimes user warnings are just simply annoying. Like, it turns out software is not always correct when it warns people, and the warning may be a false alarm. So really the purpose of a warning, I want to emphasize this, is to usher people to safety in cases where there actually is danger, but to allow them to get on with their ordinary work and their digital lifestyle in those cases where there isn't danger. So ideally, the software has reason to suspect something may be wrong. We need input from a user to make a final decision, and hopefully the warning will allow the user to make just the right decision so that they can stop in cases of danger, but proceed in cases where actually everything is okay. Okay. So I want to talk about a case where a warning really made a big difference, where this is like a high-stakes case with warnings. This is a story from 2011. Does everybody know what this device is? This is getting a little old now. I think some people probably have seen them before. Okay. This is a OTP device, a one-time password device. So you would use this as a, you might work in a company with high security standards, and you have a password to log into your corporate account, but you also read a little code off of this device and enter it to log into your account. This device itself became a security problem story in 2011 when hackers broke into RSA's databases and compromised the root seeds for these devices so that all the numbers that they produced were then predictable. And RSA had to recall some millions of numbers of these devices from companies that were using them because they were no longer secure. This attack happened due to a phishing email which was sent to a bunch of employees at RSA that looked something like this. It has this innocuous subject 2011 recruitment plan. It contains an Excel attachment by the same name, and apparently looked convincing enough that at least one person within RSA went into it. This was actually their spam filter caught it, and so this was somewhere in the trash. Some user like pulled it out of the trash and actually opened the email. And then comes the critical part of the story in our interest as usable security researchers here. They would have seen this warning. Incidentally, this warning is from Windows XP, which is now really old, of course. But RSA was still using XP, which was 8 years old as of 2011 when this incident happened. Anyway, this is the warning they would have seen. And this is like a critical moment, right? This user, whoever it was, has this chance to cancel opening this mail attachment here and keep RSA from being compromised. But of course they proceeded through, they opened the attachment exploited a vulnerability in Adobe Flash, and RSA as a corporation was owned and was subject to the millions of dollars that came with having to recall all those one-time password devices. So, this is not an isolated story though. We've seen stories about corporate hacks again and again at major corporations, including security corporations, like places like Lockheed Martin, where you think they have the absolute highest levels of security, right? They're a defense contractor. Or HB Gary, which is actually like a security company. So RSA is hardly alone here. And in fact, this isn't a problem just at the corporate level. Malware and phishing are problems for individual users too. In some very recent work that was published at Chi this year, some Google collaborators and I found, we asked users like, have you ever, are you aware of anyone having broken into your personal email or online social networking accounts? And fully 30% said yes. This was actually, I thought, really shocking. I thought maybe 5% of people had accounts compromised, but it's really like 30%. Like, so if you think about that, probably some of us in this room have had an experience with an account being hijacked. I can actually admit that I have had that experience. I had an account hijacked once. So these problems of malware, phishing, and account compromise are pervasive throughout society, and warnings are like one of the main tools we have for preventing them from happening. So we're often asking users to make these critical decisions to keep these bad things from happening. But something's going wrong because, you know, we're still seeing all these hacks. We're seeing accounts compromised, right? We're seeing companies get hacked. So what is the problem? Well, there's one hypothesis out there, which is that the people are the problem, that people are just idiots and they'll never do the right thing for security. And you actually see this coming from some very powerful voices. So there's this famous quote, this is a bit old, I think it's from '99, but Ed Felton, who was recently the chief technologist at the FTC, said, given a choice between dancing pigs and security, the user will pick the dancing pigs every time, right? 100% of the time. There was this comment in IEEE Security and Privacy magazine from the editor-in-chief saying most security incidents involve people shooting themselves in the foot, and people are bad judges of risk. Another quote from a higher-ranking corporate executive, there's no device known to mankind that will prevent people from being idiots, right? So you get this message that people are stupid, people are not motivated about security, people just want dancing pigs, right? We're all fools. That's a fair hypothesis. But there's actually another hypothesis which I'd like to put forth to you, and I think those of you who are HCI folks will probably be somewhat sympathetic to this, is that maybe it's the software that's flawed. Maybe it's the user experiences in these warnings that is actually the problem and is leading people astray. So it might be the case that, in fact, people are conscientious. Maybe they're trying to make the right decision here. But most people are not experts in security. So they'll look for the cues that they can find to try to make the right decision, but they don't have master's degrees in computer science. They're probably not equipped to make really advanced decisions. Therefore, they're going to look for cues in their software, the user experience in their software. So the software is going to shape their behavior. And that the reason so many things are going wrong is that actually until now, security user experiences have mostly been designed ad hoc and aren't really ushering people toward the right decisions. So I also wanted to add, and I said this in the abstract, I was at Microsoft and had responsibility for designing these warnings throughout many of the products at Microsoft. And I actually was asking one product to do some of the, follow some of the guidelines we had for designing usable security. And I got the response that, no, we're not going to do that because 99% of people don't read warnings and they just click through and proceed. And I thought that was a really interesting statement. I asked if he had data on that, and he didn't. But so I thought, well, we should actually collect data and find out if that 99% figure is true. So a lot of this work is motivated by seeing these kinds of quotes about how people are stupid and hearing that people just click through warnings like monkeys at 99% rates and trying to test whether that's true in an empirical way. To offer some evidence that maybe it's actually the software that's at fault here, let's look in detail at that warning that the person at RSA would have clicked through. So it's this mail attachment warning, and it starts with the sentence, you should only open attachments from a trustworthy source. Now, just for the sake of argument, let's pretend you're a conscientious user, and let's walk through this warning the way a conscientious user who's really trying to do the right thing. Let's try to look at this warning from their perspective. So they read this sentence. I think that user might reasonably ask, well, okay, I should only open it if it's from a trustworthy source. So what is the source of this attachment? Where did it come from? Well, our software doesn't really know. It came in email, and email is not a verified communications channel, so we can't really tell the user what the source is. So the user says, well, okay, I don't know the source. But even if I did, I might ask, well, what makes a source trustworthy or not trustworthy? If I'm not a computer security expert, I probably don't know what a trustworthy source is. Is download.com a trustworthy source? Is my friend from Google a trustworthy source? Is my friend from outside my company a trustworthy source? It's hard to say. The statement starts with you should, and that usually means that if I don't follow the advice, something bad is going to happen. But notice the warning has no indication to me of what that bad thing might be. I don't know if this warning is telling me that, oh, yeah, it's a good idea to open things from trustworthy sources because you'll have a more efficient browsing experience that way. Or maybe it means like, hey, something really, really bad is going to happen if you don't pay attention to this warning. Totally unclear. It has this thing that is basically a bug, I think. It says you should only open attachments from a trustworthy source. And then it gives you the option to open, right? But a user might reasonably say, well, there's a save option too. Is it safe to save this thing? Because it said don't open it if it's not from a trustworthy source, but maybe it's okay to save. I don't really know. And And finally, I think this conscientious user is just like so confused now. They might say, well, okay, give me a prescriptive set of steps I might follow to make the right decision here. But of course, there's nothing like that. There are no instructions here for how a user might go about making a responsible decision. So I think most people are really just left to picking randomly and basically saying, well, I guess this is okay, right? And I think probably a lot of us have clicked through warnings like this thinking like, in fact, we see in lab studies and stuff, people like are almost like leaning away from the button as they're clicking it, but they're clicking through because they want to get something done, and they're just hoping nothing terrible is going to happen. But really, they're not informed about the decision they're making. So I want to ask, as part of if software is in fact at fault, maybe we can improve the design of these warning experiences to help people to make better decisions. So an important question for me in the jobs I've had is, does warning design actually matter? So I'm gonna now show you a study that I did while at Microsoft with collaborators from CMU and answer some of the questions that I've posed so far. So first, we'll try to ask, are people just idiots? And I want to break that down into a couple of hypotheses. One is this hallway conjecture I heard that everybody just clicks OK all the time. 99% of the time people just proceed through warnings, and that 99% of the time people never read warnings, right? They don't read any text, they just pick a button and click. And then, assuming we can address that, let's ask, can the design of a warning actually affect people's behavior and lead them toward making better decisions? And I want to break this down into two questions. The first, do people read instructions? Thus, can we offer instructions that may help them make better decisions? And two, do people notice some of the details that go into a warning, or do details not matter? We can just have kind of one big button and just hope everybody presses the right one. Okay. So I'm about to talk to you about a user study we did with warnings, but I want to first show you that we did a lot of weird things you may think are a little weird in this study, and I want to explain that studying warnings is really hard, so we had to do things in a very particular way. So first, it's really hard to study warnings with a traditional laboratory-based user study. The reasons being, if we bring people into a lab at Microsoft or Google, put them in front of one of our computers, and then ask them to do tasks until they encounter warnings, nothing is really at risk, right? If you're a user in some corporate lab, you don't care about Microsoft's machine or Google's machine. You also think, well, I'm in a user study at Microsoft. Microsoft's not going to do anything bad to me, so I'm sure I'm okay. And so if we ask people to respond to warnings in this situation, we won't get realistic responses because their perception of risk is that they're in a safe environment and they'll be much more inclined to click through potentially dangerous things. You can try to study warnings in the field by instrumenting people's computers and then watching what they do. That's also quite hard. So warnings are very rare events. They may appear on the order of to 1% of users in a month or something like that, if there's something like a phishing warning, which are quite rare. So if you want to capture these warnings, you need huge numbers of participants. It's also tricky to monitor users' computers because there are various levels of privacy, various ethical things that we need to comply with. We need to not collect private data, certain kinds of private data from people. Getting software to monitor people's behavior on the computers is tricky, and so forth. So it can be quite hard to study warnings in both the lab or the field. There are also some general difficulties with studying warnings. First, if you want to get people's true responses to warnings, you don't want to tell them that you're measuring their response to warnings, because that will raise their awareness that this is a study about security, that they're supposed to do the right thing with respect to security, and thus they may behave in an overly security conscious way. So you want to watch how people respond to warnings when they don't think they're being watched. Which means that often these studies require a deception. That is, we need to tell users the study is about one thing when in fact we're looking at their security warning behavior. Of course, to comply with ethical standards of the IRBs that I've worked with, we inform users after a study is over what the study was about, but as they go into the study, typically they don't know that it's about warnings. Okay, so the answer, I'm going to talk to you today hopefully about two different studies. The first one I want to talk about, though, The answer to these difficulties with the study was to use Mechanical Turk. So this is a way, this is kind of the study was kind of a blend of laboratory and field studies. So we had about 1,000 people who were recruited on Mechanical. Does everybody know what Mechanical Turk is, by the way? It used to be you had to explain this. I think now everybody pretty much knows. We recruited about 1,000 people from Mechanical Turk, and what we're going to do with them is direct them to websites that we control that will show them fake warnings. They're actually JavaScript-based warnings, but the warnings look so real that users were convinced they were actually coming from their browser or operating system. This way, we were able to get the advantages of a field study of having lots and lots of participants. We are able to convince them that this is not just that they're on their own machine, so they don't think they're in a perfectly safe environment. But we have the advantages of a lab study in that we can actually ask people to go do a task for us that will cause these warnings to appear. In this case, the warning that we studied was the Smart Screen Filter Unknown Executable warning. Warnings come in many different flavors. I showed you a bunch at the beginning of the talk. This particular warning is one that comes when you're trying to download a file using Internet Explorer. The files that get downloaded in IE get checked through the Microsoft Service Smart Screen Filter, which is familiar with a lot of the common downloads like Adobe Flash and so on, and familiar with a lot of malware. So it'll allow the well-known things, it'll block anything as known malware, but there's a bunch of software that falls in the middle where Smart Screen Filter doesn't know what to do with it, and so what it does is prompt the user. The prompt looks something like this. So it'll give you these two options to not run the program, delete the program, or you can go under more options, and that's where you can actually download and run the program. Okay. So the scenario that we're going to put people through is again, this was a joint work between Microsoft and Carnegie Mellon. So we told people on Turk they were being asked to do a survey of online games for Carnegie Mellon. They were going to go to a site at Carnegie Mellon and be directed to a survey that would ask them to download a series of web games and then answer questions about them. So this is where the deception comes in. The study wasn't really about online games, but the people think the survey is about online games, so that when they see a security warning, they will hopefully respond in a way that is fairly natural, and they're not primed to be thinking about security. Okay. This table summarizes our slightly complicated experimental design. I only say slightly complicated because we had 3 different independent variables, so we could study a lot of different effects with warnings. The first variable was the context that we put people in. So one context, which I'm calling monitoring, was one where Turkers who agreed to do this task would come to the site at Carnegie Mellon, and then they'd be told, oh, you have to install this monitoring software from Carnegie Mellon in order for us to watch you as you do this study. So what happens is they're told to install this plugin, they click on the link to install the plugin, and then they see a security warning. And it's ostensibly from Carnegie Mellon. In a second condition, which is a different context, they start a survey about online games, they download a couple games, and then one of the games tells them, in order to run this game, you have to install Silverlight, which is a Microsoft product. Click here to install it, and then they click there to install Silverlight, and then they see a warning. They see the same warning that the subjects in the other conditions see. Right? So in this case, the plugin is ostensibly from Microsoft. In the other case, it's ostensibly from CMU. That's going to be important later. And a second independent variable that we used was the way that these warnings are designed. And we had 4 different conditions. And the important thing to remember here is just that they go from really super duper simple to more complicated and having more explanatory text. So we had one condition where it's just totally stripped down. All you see is a brief statement that this program might harm your computer, and then 3 options. We add a little more text in a second condition. We add a little bit more text in a third condition. And then we had a final condition where we thought, well, maybe people actually read warnings and we could give them some real helpful text and instructions and so forth. And so in this warning, we have like the instructions I highlighted here that give people some steps they can follow to make a good decision. We show who the publisher of the software is, and so forth, right? So we went from very simple design to somewhat more complex design. And our final variable was who the publisher of the software is. As I said, there's one condition in which the participants think they're getting software from Carnegie Mellon, and one where they think they're getting a software from Microsoft. But we threw in an extra little twist, which was we had a benign-looking and a malicious-looking version of each of those publishers in the two conditions. So in the Microsoft condition, participants see that the publisher is MIICR0S0FT Incorporated, which we hoped was a really obvious-looking, like, malicious-type name. Ironically, as it turns out, we found out in open-ended comments later that not all participants picked up that this wasn't Microsoft. I thought it looked very not like Microsoft, but if people are reading quickly, I guess they may not notice. So as I said, we had about 1,000 participants, 1,064 to be exact. Turk is great because it lets you recruit a very broad range of the population. So we had nice gender balance, as well as an age range from 18 to 66, which is pretty cool. You can't usually get that in like a university-based sample, for example. Okay. So let's talk about the question that I hope you're all interested in now, which is, are we all just complete idiots when it comes to security warnings? So let's break this down. First, does everyone just choose run anyway, right? If everybody was an idiot, do we need to, I guess, so this is my second, this will be my second fire drill today because we had one on the 4th floor this morning, so
No, I think we need to go out in the hall.
I think we're all going to choose run away when the security alarm goes on. So is that the alarm? I actually wasn't. All right, so
Yeah, I think we're gonna
take a brief break. Okay.
Take a break. I have such a hard time, actually. Hey guys, we're taking a little break for a fire alarm. We'll be back in a minute. I did not get this Hangout link to work right.
Hey guys, I'm so sorry, but you have to go out.
Oh, she lives here as well as an official orange
That makes me
jersey.
with my best. Thank you. You don't have to go outside, just to the stairs. Won't be very long. You don't have to stay long.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope so. I say you want to get out. Let's wait till people come back in here. See, I can't, when I follow this link, I'm getting like this Google Hangout here, like I'm in a chat, you know? It's like, I don't want that. It's like, you do feedback. Yeah, it started. I saw it earlier. I just think there's all kinds of problems with that Hangout interface. I mean, there's these people who are in the Hangout. Yeah, someone, and I saw but like the UI to get to it in different devices is just crazy. You go to Google Plus. We had a separate Hangout app for a while. Is that still there?
All right. I did not make up that warning to just illustrate what the talk is about, but okay. So we were on the question of does everyone just choose run anyway, which is what the people are idiots hypothesis might predict. So what I'm going to show you here is results for just the monitoring scenario and the Silverlight scenario without considering what the other variables look like. So in the condition where people were asked to download something from Carnegie Mellon, 90% said yes, that's okay. Go ahead and run that program. That's fine with me. 90%, right? So that actually is a quite high number. Maybe in fact it is the case that everybody's just kind of blindly choosing to go ahead and run the software that they're being asked about. But in the Silverlight condition, this dropped to 38%. So when people were asked, hey, install Silverlight from Microsoft, it dropped to 38%. This is a 52% difference between these two conditions, right? The click-through rate for the CMU download is 90%, and it's 38% for Silverlight. That's statistically significant, of course. And what it says is, like, there's definitely some thought process going on here, right? Like, we're not sure what it is at this point, but we know that for some reason, the Carnegie Mellon condition, people are happier to click through, and in the Microsoft condition, they're not. Yeah.
Can you take into account, like, the difficulty, or like, at what point did you judge they downloaded it? That they clicked on the button, or they actually successfully downloaded it?
These are actually, like, they were fake mocked JavaScript warnings. So there's no real download going on, right? We couldn't do that to users, but yeah. So just when they clicked on the option, that was what the decision was.
Could it be that people either thought they already had Silverlight installed, and so like, I don't want to install it yet, or had experience with Silverlight, said, I don't want that virus on my
yeah, so your first question, our text actually said you need to update to the latest version or something. So in case people did have it, we were telling them they needed to update. To your second question, I mean, that's a really interesting one. I think the only thing we can tell so far is people are thinking something, right? They're making a conscious decision here, and whether it's because they're saying, I don't trust Silverlight, I don't want Silverlight, I don't trust Microsoft, I trust Carnegie Mellon because they said they're the sponsors of the study, but I don't know why Microsoft is involved. We're not really sure. Yes?
Remind me the setup a little bit.
Right. Yes, correct. So yes, the contexts are quite different. So in the CMU download, it's not really just about branding CMU versus Microsoft. We assume those are both trusted brands. We think, I mean, if I were to speculate, I think the reason is that in the monitoring condition, the Turkers had just accepted the task in Turk and said, yes, I'll participate in this survey. And the task was advertised as being from Carnegie Mellon. So then when they're hit with being asked to download something from Carnegie Mellon for purposes of this survey, they'd kind of already decided to trust Carnegie Mellon, so installing software wasn't a big deal. We had not mentioned that the study was also being done by Microsoft. So once they got So those in the other condition, which they actually started doing a survey about online games, and then by the time they got to the third game they were supposed to look at, they got this prompt to download Silverlight from Microsoft, and by that point we imagine that people said, well, I don't want to put stuff on my computer just for the sake of this survey that's unrelated to the survey, and so you can understand why they would just say, no, I don't want to do that. We did incidentally give them the option. We told them at the beginning of the survey, you don't have to play every game we tell you to. So we gave people we weren't saying you have to complete every game in order to finish the survey. So they knew they had the option of not installing this particular game. So, but anyway, I just want to say, like, I think already we can tell hypothesis 1, the people are idiots, is wrong. People are thinking. People are making decisions. What about, do people actually read the content that's in warnings? So what I'm going to show you now is these numbers are for each of our conditions, the median time that people spent before reacting to the warning. And I'd like you to concentrate especially on the trimmed condition, which is that really simple stripped down version of the warning, and the full condition, which is the warning that has a bunch of text and other information in it. And what you see, if you look at the summary lines at the bottom, the median time spent on the trimmed warning was 4.8 seconds, and the median time spent on the full version of the warning was 7.8 seconds. That's quite a bit longer. In fact, that's a 62% difference in the amount of time people are spending median on each warning. That, of course, is statistically significant. So this seems like a strong indication that some people are taking in some of that information that's in the fuller version of the warning. They're at least the 3-second difference in the median times is longer than you need to just quickly search for the option and click it. Right? 3 seconds is actually quite a bit of time when it comes to these warnings. And so it seems pretty clear that something is actually happening in people's brains, that they're processing it. When we give them more information, they process it somehow. So at this point, I was pretty convinced that actually people are not just idiots. There's some thought process going on, but I didn't know a lot of the specifics. And I'm curious whether warning design can actually affect behavior. And I want to start with getting back to the reading question. We're going to go a little deeper into the analysis here and see whether people read and respond to instructions. Bear with me as I explain this graph. You'll find in a minute. I think it's fascinating, but it takes a bit of explanation. So this graph is showing on the x-axis the percentile that each user fell in terms of how long they spent responding to a warning. So that is, the fastest people are on the left side, and the slowest people are on the right side. The y-axis is showing the number so far who have chosen run the unsafe option, the run anyway option. Okay, if you look at this, this is, by the way, for the full text condition, the one with all the instructions, right? If you look at how the line starts, there's kind of a straight line that has a slope of 0.78. That is, 78% of people up to this point are choosing run anyway, the less safe option. But you see this dramatic bend in the line, right, at about the 36th percentile. That 36th percentile happens to be about people who spent 5.6 seconds or longer looking at the warning. And the line, as I said, bends dramatically, and if you then plot the slope from there on, only 37% of people are clicking through the warning, or choosing the unsafe option, right? That's a 41% difference in people who are spending very little time with the warning, are clicking through at a much higher rate than those who are spending considerably more time with the warning. And that's statistically significant.
So it's still a huge percentage.
It is, and we'll get, okay, well, I'll address that kind of toward the end of the talk. It is a huge percentage, but I think with users we'll never get 100% compliance. And it's always...
If you got 40% compliance, would you feel that
That's a really interesting question. I actually think that this is a bit of a philosophical aside, because some of the old literature in this space used to say, oh, you only get a 33% drop-off from this warning. That's just way too low. I think that kind of any drop-off in people installing malware is a big win. I argue even that if you get 5% of Windows users to not install malware where they otherwise would have, that could be 1 million machines that don't have malware on them, right? Like at scale, 5% is a pretty huge figure. And so even a warning is just kind of a speed bump. There's lots of other stuff we do to try to prevent malware, but I think if it helps in some way, it matters. And something like a 41% difference between a warning that people didn't read versus that they did read is actually pretty significant. But anyway, so why might we see that bend in the curve? Well, if you look at the warning, the full warning, it may very well be that people read, the people who spent more time with the warning actually read it, and then they would have read this paragraph, which says, if you were expecting to download a popular program, and despite the illustration, this was actually the condition where people thought they were downloading Silverlight, right, which should be a very popular program. It says, if you were expecting to download a popular program that many people use, this is not it. It may be a fake. We recommend that you delete this program and search for the real version. So it's a very clear instruction, like, if you think this is Silverlight, nope, you're wrong, it's not it. So you can see why there might be that bend in the curve. When people actually read the warning, they pay attention to the instruction. Now, you might also say, well, it could be just that the people who spend more time with the warning are the more conscientious people in the first place, so maybe it's not that they actually follow the instruction, but it's that they just are the more conscientious group. It appears that's not the case. It appears they actually did follow the instruction, because if we look at one of the other warning conditions that doesn't have the instructions, we can plot the same two slopes on this curve, and see that in up to the 36th percentile, 70% are choosing run anyway. And then beyond that, it's 61%. So there's not really that much of a drop-off, even amongst those who are spending lots of time with the warning. That's not statistically significant. This one is it's one of the two intermediate versions. So the important thing is it doesn't have with the big instruction, yeah, the instruction that says, this is a fake version of what you think you're downloading. So this is not a statistically significant result, so it suggests that the drop-off really is due to that instruction in that full warning. So I thought that was really a cool illustration of what we can do with warning design. So another question: do people notice some of the details in the warnings? And in this case, I'm going to talk about the detail as being who the warning says published the software that they're downloading. So remember, we had this condition where we, even within the Carnegie Mellon download, one time we said the publisher was Carnegie Mellon, and the other time we said it was this anonymous-sounding KPH company. We made up this company name, KPH NetSoft, and said they were the publisher of the monitoring software. In the Microsoft condition, we had some people thought they were downloading Silverlight from Microsoft, and some thought it was Silverlight from MIICR0S0FT, which is supposed to look like a malicious version of Microsoft. So I'm not showing you this, but oddly, we did not notice a statistically significant difference in the download rates for the two different publisher conditions, the good one and then the bad one. What we did notice is these differences in the amount of time people spend with the warning. So in the monitoring condition, people spend 13% longer with the warnings when it's the unknown publisher, the KPH NetSoft. And in the Microsoft condition, they spend 36% more time with the warning when it's from this malicious-looking version of Microsoft than with the legitimate version of Microsoft. So there's clearly something going on in people's heads when we make the publisher sound unfamiliar. Now, as I said, it did not lead to a decrease in the run anyway rates, which was strange, and I can't account for that. But people are noticing that detail, right? And they're processing the warning differently. So that's interesting. So let's go back to hypothesis one, and I hope that by now you're all convinced that it's absolutely false. That there's definitely some, people are making decisions, there's some kind of cognitive processing going on, they're processing the information in the warning. You can design warnings in different ways and get different behaviors. That these statements need to stop being said. I'm really, really tired of hearing that people are idiots, because I really think that just it just advances the false perception that people can't be trusted to handle security, because really they actually are trying to do the right thing. And I think that as an industry, we have a responsibility to help them more, to make better decisions. And I think we're doing that now. This work is now a few years old, and I think the warnings in Microsoft products and also in Google products now have really gotten a lot better. But I hope that we can stop hearing statements like this, right?
If that's something that said the user will pick dancing pigs 60% of the time. I mean, because it still seems like, I agree with you, if you limit some, it's an issue, but there has to be other solutions to this problem, or else we still have.
Absolutely. And if Ed Felton had said the user will pick up the dancing pig 60% of the time, I'd be totally happy. I would say, Ed, you're absolutely right. Your statement is data driven and backed by empirical evidence. So thank you, Ed. But I'd also agree with you, which is that I think the industry does have a lot of responsibility to do other stuff about malware. And in fact, we do a lot of other stuff about malware, right? Stuff that you've all seen the warnings, but you don't see a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff, which is flagging malicious sites, blocking. We block some things entirely without showing a warning. When we're 100% sure the user's about to get infected, we'll just block malicious downloads and stuff. There are educational efforts to try to help users do better in these things. There are, efforts to mitigate the damage when people do get malware on their machines. There's like the whole antivirus industry, which is doing things to try to, when malware might get on a machine, the antivirus software can hopefully detect it and clean it. Right? There's a lot of this stuff going on. You might say, and indeed I have asked, why do we need warnings at all? Why can't we just do eventually get to perfect detection where we know what's good and what's not good, and we don't have to prompt the user. We can just say, this is bad, you're not allowed to have it. Or we can say, this is good, go ahead, but no need to prompt. I don't think we're ever going to get there because, for one thing, some cases are completely indistinguishable to software. I mean, for example, with unfamiliar software, might be malicious, right? If a user's trying to download something, it might be malicious, but that looks very similar to like the parent whose daughter is a computer science major and just said, hey, download my first project. You can run the program here, right? That'll be totally unfamiliar. We've never seen that software before, and we don't know. The user has context there that we, as Google or Microsoft, simply can't have, and so we have to prompt the user in those cases and ask them what they want to do, I think. So I don't think warnings are going completely away. I hope that we will minimize them and make better decisions in the cases where we're completely sure that things are good or bad, but we're probably stuck with warnings for a while. All right, looks like I still have some time left. Right, we go till 1:30 or so. So I want to. Cool. I want to talk a bit about some work that I've done since coming to Google, so in the last year or so. So having I think established that the hypothesis hypothesis one is, sorry, I work in the same building. I can't really blame you guys. Yeah, I can't. I don't want to blame the building owner either. So I want to delve now more into some more specific design factors that might actually influence behavior. Having established that design can influence behavior, we might ask, well, how? And a cool thing that I was able to transition to since coming to Google is that at Google we're actually able to collect telemetry data. So we completely avoid the problems with both lab and field studies by being able to collect data from real Chrome users in the actual use of the Chrome browser. In this case, I'm going to be showing you data from 130,000 warning impressions, which is just, I think it's so cool that we can study warnings this way. Like we can get huge amounts of data, and it's not polluted in any way by giving users false or contrived tasks. Like this is things they're actually doing. We also have the ability to do A/B experiments, so that is we can deploy different design variations of the warnings in the browser and present them to random sets of users. So some users see design A, some see design B, and we can compare the behavior of the two groups. So that's a really cool way of studying warnings. I'm gonna switch the actual warning that I'm talking about to SSL warnings. These are the warnings that you probably have all seen because we deliver lots of these, like hundreds of millions a month. So these are the ones that, like, where you see the crossed out HTTPS, because it means that the site you're connecting to may not actually be the site that you think it is. It may be that there's someone, a man in the middle, who's listening in on the connection that you're making. And these are usually due to misconfiguration errors. In this particular example, like if you go to the bare domain, reddit.com, and you try to connect over HTTPS, you'll get a certificate warning, at least as of a few days ago. Reddit should probably enable their bare domain to serve content over HTTPS, but for whatever reason, it's not set up. But there's not really something going wrong in this example. However, the cases where this warning is really, really critical might be cases of like political dissidents in authoritarian regimes who are trying to organize over Twitter or Facebook are often under government surveillance. And one of the tricks, is this a fire warning? I am going to choose to proceed anyway. Oh, concluded for the day. Okay, so we're good to go. Cool. Okay. Right. So the cases where this might be really dangerous are when journalists or dissidents are trying to organize over Facebook or Twitter or something, and governments are actually listening in on their communications. And they might see warnings like this, and the warnings would really be bad in those scenarios. And it's important that they be warned and that they know that something might actually be going wrong. Even when for you, those of you who may not be in those situations, this warning can sometimes mean that a bad guy somewhere is trying to listen in on your connections to capture your credit card number or your passwords or what have you. So the warning can be often a false alarm, but also sometimes really critical. So this is Chrome's version of the SSL warning. It says this is probably not the site you're looking for. It has a little bit of explanation and then has the options to proceed anyway or go back to safety. The click-through rate, which means the number of people the percentage of people choosing proceed anyway, which is the less safe option, is 68%. Interestingly, we've had the opportunity to study the same warning in Firefox, and the warning looks quite different. As you can see, it has the option get me out of here, and if you want to choose the less safe option, you have to go under I understand the risks and then click a different link there. The click-through rate on this warning is only 33%. And remember, it was 68% for Chrome, and it's the same context of warning. So that's kind of, we find it kind of interesting, maybe a little disconcerting that the difference is that large just between the two browsers.
How are you able to test on Firefox?
So this was Chrome people and Firefox people actually got together and collaborated and said, let's compare our warnings and the click-through rates respectively. So there was, Firefox has the same kind of telemetric data collection that Chrome does. So they were able to compute.
Ask people do the unsafe behavior
in Firefox. That's correct.
You have to go through another level.
Right.
And say, yeah.
Well, we'll see in a moment what the factors appear to be, but one of them seems to be that you have to go through an extra level. Yeah. Sorry, I can't hear up here. Right. Okay. Yeah, I think what you're. Yeah. That's a really good point. Right. As I said at the beginning when introducing this warning, sometimes it's a false positive, in which case it's fine for people to click through. We really shouldn't have shown them a warning. In other cases, it's really critical, and in those cases, we want them to not do the unsafe thing. Unfortunately, when it comes to actually measuring the success of these warnings, like we don't know which cases turned out to be safe or unsafe. If we knew that, we would have not shown the warning. We would have just told the user, don't go here, right? So the best we can do is measure this click-through rate, which is the people choosing the less safe option, and we can say, what we say is philosophically, we'd like that to be lower because, one, we want to err on the side of safety. Two, it's often the case that users can safely not proceed through the warning, but proceed later, like that maybe the site's misconfigured now, and it'll fix itself in a couple hours, then the user can go through without even seeing the warning, or maybe they're on an unsafe network now, but when they, like at Starbucks, but when they go home, they'll be back on their safe network and it's safe to connect there. So in general, we'd like to see the click-through rate be lower. However, your point is absolutely correct, and I can't really argue with it, except to say, as security people, we feel better if the click-through rate's a bit lower. So I'm not even saying in this case that Firefox is necessarily better, right? It's just people seem to be behaving safer. That's about the best I can say. But it's also interesting that, like, somehow the warnings are causing people to behave differently. And if we're just interested in how do you get people to behave in a certain way when you show them a warning, this question of why there's such a big gap in the click-through rates is quite an interesting one. So we tried several hypotheses for what that might account for the difference between the Chrome and Firefox click-through rates. So one thing we did was to actually perfectly mimic the Firefox warning design in Chrome and deploy it to Chrome users. Apparently on Twitter, this actually looked very strange. Some people were reporting, why am I seeing the Firefox warning in Chrome? And we were able to explain it's part of a user study. But so they actually saw like the same warning in Chrome and that is shown in Firefox. And we thought, maybe Firefox has better style, maybe it's the imagery or the wording or whatever. But in any case, we did notice a drop in the click-through rate. It went from 68% to 56% when we mocked the Firefox warning in Chrome. However, it obviously doesn't account for the entire difference in click-through rate because the true Firefox click-through rate is actually 33%. So it looks like the design of the warning accounts for some percentage, but not the entire amount. Of course, that's an excellent question, James. Yes, it's entirely possible that demographics accounts for a lot of the rest of the difference. We don't actually know what the demographic difference might be. We can speculate that perhaps Firefox users are more tech-savvy. Perhaps Firefox users are less tech-savvy than Chrome users. Perhaps they're younger, older. We really don't know. But definitely demographics could be part of it.
Some extra dialogue after this to ask a question or something that might really get out of it.
So we're that's very forward-thinking because that's like work we're doing now and that we have no results on yet, but we're trying to build that kind of capability. Yeah, that would be really cool to have. Yes?
Wouldn't the respect people have for receiving the warnings?
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm actually going to ask if you will hold that for 1 sec because I'll get a bit to reputation later, and if I don't answer your question, please ask it again because it's a very good question. Was there another hand up? Okay, cool. So we also had a second hypothesis we tried here. We thought that maybe we could get the click-through rate lower by using different images in Chrome. There's this psychological literature that suggests that when you show images of watching eyes, people will behave more socially responsibly. So for example, if you put up signs above the recycling bins of eyes looking at you and the sign says like, make sure you recycle, more people will like sort their garbage properly than if you have no such sign. So we thought, well, maybe if we put like a watching eyes of a policeman, like in this first image here, or watching eyes of a criminal, that people will like wake up, pay attention, and possibly behave differently with the warning. As a control, we also tried a red traffic light. But as you can see, like, so we tried all these different images in the Chrome warning, and they basically made no difference whatsoever. I mean, you see like 3% differences between the policeman and the criminal, but that's actually more likely due to daily variation than it is to the actual imagery itself. So it appears that like these images basically make no difference. Also, in the version of the Firefox warning we did in Chrome, we had one version with Larry, the passport control officer, and one with no image whatsoever. And it looks like, sadly, Larry is not the reason that we have this lower click-through rate in the Firefox warning. Larry actually seems to make no difference whatsoever. I like Larry personally, so I hope he stays in there, but he's not the one making the difference. We also thought maybe if we gave this like Chrome style as opposed to literally mocking Firefox in Chrome, we might do a little bit better. If you look at the warning on the left, is more like looks more Chrome-like, it's got the blue button and stuff. In fact, that made no difference. So we can style it Google style, we can style it Mozilla style. It really doesn't matter. So what we concluded is, okay, we know design is influencing warning reactions because we did get some drop in the click-through rate when we mocked the Firefox warning in Chrome. But we weren't able to try enough conditions to find out exactly how. But James has already guessed what some of the reasons might be. For one thing, it might be the placement of choices. So in the default Chrome SSL warning, the less safe choice, which is proceed anyway, is to the left, and it's the first choice presented, right? So the less safe choice is the first one being presented. It's very likely people are just going to that choice and clicking through because they think it's safe. Whereas in Firefox, the most prominently presented choice on the left side is get me out of here. That's the safe thing to do. And the less safe thing is buried under I understand the risks. You have to click there and then click again on another thing, and then you can actually proceed through the warning. So that probably is a big part of why the Firefox design is working better than the Chrome design. It may also be that the Firefox warning is more comprehensible and understandable, so it has a headline that we think people will understand better that says this connection is untrusted. It has some instructions about how people might want to respond, and it hides technical details under this link instead of putting them right there on the front of the page in a big paragraph like Chrome does. As I said, we haven't tested these conditions yet, but we suspect these are the factors at play, right? That probably that extra hiding the unsafe option is a big part of it, and possibly cleaning up the text and having more understandable language is another part of why the Firefox warning design is better than the Chrome design. And then as far as like the additional drop that we saw from the 56% rate of the Firefox warning mocked in Chrome to the actual 33% rate in Firefox, that's probably due to a combination of demographics, and Firefox on the whole shows fewer warnings, and so we think that habituation is a bit of a factor. Chrome users may see so many warnings they just click through them all, whereas in Firefox they see fewer warnings, so they pay more attention when they actually see them. I want to show you one last thing, and this is fairly quick, but I want to switch gears for a sec to a different warning. This is Chrome's malware warning. Yes, please. I think what you're saying is they may have already visited the site before, and if they've clicked through the warning once on that site, they probably will click through it again because they've already evaluated the site. I think that's a good point. It is possible that they've evaluated the warnings and thus know how to respond quickly, but what we find is that Chrome, they might see like the SSL warning very frequently. Then when we show a malware warning or a phishing warning, which are actually much more severe warnings, people confuse them with the SSL warning, and they'll click through the really unsafe warnings, which is very bad. So there's definitely some confusion going on. Oh, if we knew the baseline false positive rates of the warnings themselves, I agree. It's very hard to compute those false positive rates, though, because as I say, if we knew the ground truth, we would tell them in the warning. Right?
Well, are you not able to get from your log all those URLs and somehow check them?
We're absolutely not able to get that from the log because we do not collect that kind of private data. We don't collect data on the URLs that people visit. We cannot collect that. Like watch Googlers browsing the web? What do you mean?
Well, Google knows what page.
Oh, you mean, I see. If a site had a misconfigured certificate, we could go ask them.
You don't record the URL, right? Is that what you're saying?
Sorry?
So when I get the study data back, and you know somebody got a warning or not, what
right.
they did, you're saying you don't know what.
We do not know what URL they were visiting. We cannot collect that data. That's right. Yeah.
So it seems like lots of study design.
So,
because that's like a key confound.
Right. So I think that we could. I mean, that's a serious ethical question. We definitely cannot.
It's an opt-in kind of thing.
It might be possible to do on an opt-in basis. We definitely cannot do it with this methodology because this is users who have said they're willing to share telemetry data with us, but they've been explicitly told we won't collect URLs that you visit. So we can't do it with this methodology. Yeah, but I think you're absolutely right. It would be nice to have that methodology. I would love to go check the ground truth of places people visit.
Because it could even be, when we talk about what's the difference between these two populations, they might be going to different sites.
Absolutely, yeah. But I don't know because we don't have that data. Yeah. Did I address what you were asking? Yeah. Yeah, remote question?
They're up here.
Yes. I think that actually that's a really excellent point that I hadn't thought about that much, but that's a pretty clear demographic difference between. Actually, I don't really know what Firefox's mobile offering looks like. I'm not sure they have one. But if that's.
Were you looking at Chrome's mobile?
So this is Chrome on all devices. It's people again. It's people who've opted in to have telemetric data collected. But if they were on a mobile device, we would collect it.
Probably get that bit. No,
We probably could get. Yeah, I believe we have that. Yeah. I think maybe you're saying it's okay to let people proceed to like a phishing site, but as long as they don't input their password. Is that? Oh, so block them from. Right. We can't actually block people completely from proceeding to sites because for one thing, we're not always right. Our warning might be wrong. For another thing, right. Oh, as a methodological idea, I see. Yeah, so I think that's similar to what we did in the Microsoft study that I described at the beginning, where we made up domains and made up fake warnings that were actually mocks, and people thought they were making really high-level, or thought they were making real risk decisions, but in fact they were just phony decisions that we made up for the sake of a user study. So I think it's
on a real site for ethical.
Google could definitely not claim that a site is malicious when in fact the site's not.
I'm saying it's even malicious, but made your UI specifically worse in a certain way.
Oh yeah,
right.
That we
need more people to harm.
That we cannot do.
Right.
Yeah. There are a lot of things we cannot do for ethical reasons and legal reasons. So I think what we've been able to do with the warning is actually pretty cool. It used to be you couldn't even do like telemetry data at all, and I couldn't be talking about the stuff publicly. But now we're able to do these studies, and we want to share it because I think that it shows we're really trying to do the right thing here. Yeah. Just I won't give you the Latin root. I guess I will give you the Latin roots. I mean, because that's how I understand the word. Tele is like from afar, like television and telephone, and metric, metrics, so measuring. So it's like being able to collect data from users who are far away. So
okay. So it's like an impersonal. It's a personal kind of.
It's very impersonal. It's right. It's like a software product is out to a user. They do stuff with it, and the software sends some kind of data about their usage back to a centralized place, like servers at Google or. Exactly. That's why it's a very different methodology. It has pros and cons. Like you can't get as much detail typically compared with a lab study where you can watch the person very intimately and ask them questions in person. But it gives you massive scale and it lets you watch what people do when they're not being watched and stuff like that. So, was there a hand over here? Oh, cool. Okay. So I might actually just let you go at this point, except that I want to show you a couple cool things. Because we had this question about reputation before. So reputation is an interesting thing. We did a quick study where we asked people to tell us what would they do if they saw a warning in when trying to go to a not very well-known blog versus trying to go to YouTube. So if they were shown a malware warning when going to a not well-known, a low reputation blog that is not well-known, versus shown a warning about malware when they were going to YouTube, which is obviously very well-known, how would they react? And in this case, the people said 38% of people said yes, they would proceed to YouTube because they know YouTube, they trust YouTube, and they believe that even if Chrome or even if their browser says YouTube is infected with malware, they don't believe it. They think that YouTube is always trustworthy. Whereas those going to a site, those asked if they were going to a site that they did not know as well, if they were warned that there was malware on the site, only 5% would proceed. Now this is important because not to single out YouTube, I don't know that YouTube's ever had a malware issue, but some high reputation sites do have issues with malware, and it's not necessarily the site's fault. It may be due to a ad network that's serving malicious software, maybe due to user posted content, but sometimes these sites get flagged as hosting malware because they are in fact hosting malware, not by choice, but they may in fact be hosting malware for a temporary period of time, in which case the browsers are going to warn that, hey, going to this site may be dangerous right now. And we want users to comply with those warnings to actually not click through them. But there's this, we have to overcome this effect that if people already have a lot of trust in the site that they're going to, they'll tend to have less trust in the warning and click through at higher rates. So that was to address the question you had over there. What we think it, well, I mean, I think it could mean a lot of things. I think, but one thing we looked at is we looked at the click-through rates on sites that people had visited before. So when people were, this is telemetry data. When people had, the blue lines show click-through rates on a malware warning for sites where we know people had been to the site before. Orange lines show click-through rates when we know the user had not been to the site before. And we did this, we don't actually know what the sites are, as I said, but what we're able to determine is we can check on the client side whether the site is in their Chrome history or not and send back a bit that says either it was or it wasn't. And what you find is if people have been to a site before, then they get a warning on the site, they're much more inclined to proceed to the site anyway than if they have never visited a site before, they get a warning about the site, then they'll usually not click through. And in fact, it's like almost 2 to 1 that if they've got a history with the site, they're more inclined to click through the malware warning. Even though, as I said, sites can go on and off our block lists because they might have a brief malware infection, get on our block list, then clear up the infection and come off the list. There's still this effect that users don't necessarily believe the warnings on high reputation sites. So I think I'll wrap up by just saying a few of the things I'd like you to take away. Oh, yeah.
I was curious if you're able to gauge, so like when there's news about vulnerabilities and that sort of thing, is there any? Yeah,
our data on this is a bit anecdotal at this point. I don't have data that's quite solid, but we think that we see that there have been incidents where there's a lot of news coverage of it, and we'll actually see, sometimes the news coverage might say, oh, safe browsing is flagging this ad network as malicious, but in fact it's not, don't worry about it. And then we'll actually see click-through rates tick up a bit, we think. And sometimes like a popular site might get infected, and the news sites say such and such site was infected, and we'll see click-through rates dip a bit. So we do seem to see that, and which indicates a couple interesting things. One, people are doing research when they're looking at the warnings. They seem to be then going and doing a quick Google on like, hey, is this site actually infected, or is there any news about it, and paying attention to that news. Two, it shows us that click-through rates can vary quite a bit day to day, depending on what the specific sites, what's going on in the underworld, and what specific sites happen to be on the safe browsing list that day or not on the list. So a few things I'd like you to take away. One, people, not idiots. Two, so I don't like these statements that people are all idiots. I also don't like statements that suggest that everybody behaves the same way in response to warnings. Like anytime you hear something like, users never read these warnings, please ignore that statement. Please ask Ed Felton, if you see him, to say that 60% of users might want dancing pigs, but the other 40% are happy not to get malware. It is, in fact, and also I hear often, people never read blocks of text and warnings. That, I think, is false. Some people, not everybody, right, but some people do actually read instructions and warnings and read instructions in the UI. So text does matter. It needs to be carefully crafted, and it shouldn't be overly long and obnoxious, but it's okay to put some helpful instructions in our UI. People may notice details in warnings, and whatever's going on in these warnings, like we don't have the full story yet about how people behave in response to warnings, but they are thinking. thinking is happening when people visit these warnings, and different things happen depending on the context in which the warning is shown and the design of the warning, and who's seeing the warning, and so on. So as I've said, warning design matters. We know a few of the things that seem to help, like speed bumps, like extra steps to the dangerous warning seem to help. Explanatory text and instructions seem to help. Some other things, like we couldn't find images that made a big difference. We didn't find styling that made a big difference. So we're not clear on everything that helps and what doesn't help, but warning design as a whole definitely has some effects. We just need to dig deeper into what those, what the specific design factors are that make people behave better, make better decisions in response to warnings. So that's all I have, and I'd like to thank you all for coming and hosting me, coming out and hosting me.
If people need to go, please, I think we can take a couple more questions.
I can take a couple questions.
Yeah. Your conclusion kind of gets at that maybe the design of these warnings needs to be contextual based on both the site and the user. Maybe you're right, not all people read instructions, but maybe those detailed instructions work better for a particular user, and when you do these studies, you want to maybe break out that people fall into different buckets of what kind of warning works for them and adapt to those people. And then on the site thing, similarly, if I go to, quote, a high reputation site, to figure out what that means, maybe it's traffic, like Yahoo, CNN, whatever, maybe the warning needs to be different versus I go to Joe Schmo's site and say, although you trust YouTube, you know, they've had outbreaks, or you know, some other kind of message that might be more appropriate and change my behavior. Because I would probably act like those people do go, it's YouTube, the browser's misconfigured, it's a bug or something.
So absolutely, I 100% agree. Like it's mostly been one size fits all for warnings up until now, but I think we're getting to a much better space in terms of warning design. We're learning so much stuff, like from these studies. We've learned so much since the bad old days of the non-UX oriented developer just spinning off whatever warning statement they could think of. And I think possibly the next step is going to be is customizing warnings to particular situations that we know about. I'll give you another example of a situation that we've already customized for, at least in some circumstances, which is that people who use Macs often make statements that they believe they're invulnerable to malware because Macs are always safe. That's not always true, but it's what people believe. So we've actually started saying, like, for people who we know are on a Mac, even if you use a Mac, you should pay attention to this warning. And so I think we may need a bunch of little things like that to really.
The mobile situation might again.
Right.
What Macs all read.
Yeah, sure. So I think you're right. It can depend on, it may be a different warning depending on the user. Maybe we know some are more likely to read, some are less likely to read. It may be depending on the site they're visiting, the context they're in.
Past behavior with warnings.
Sure. Well, that's going to be tricky, right? Because we can't collect too much of that person identifiable behavioral information except for people who have opted in. But
couldn't that just
could be done client side.
Right?
Yeah. Very interesting. Yes.
Earlier on, but the excessive warning, I think very insensitive warnings,
Yeah.
especially because of Microsoft. So there you go, another warning, and nothing really happens when you proceed.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's often no feedback. You proceed through a warning and nothing bad seems to happen. That's just the hard thing about security, is that like man-in-the-middle attacks are basically imperceptible. So something bad might be happening without you knowing about it. But we definitely see this issue of we call it habituation or false alarms, where the more warnings the user has seen, and especially if they proceeded through some and have seen nothing bad happen, they tend to ignore warnings they see in the future, even warnings about different topics. So these are some quotes from users we saw in one of our studies that say, like, I've received this false alarm message a few times. Usually it doesn't mean much, right? Like, this is definitely, you're right. What you're saying is definitely happening. We also find that people confuse, these are quotes about malware warnings that people are confusing with SSL warnings. So in malware warnings, we're right about sites hosting malware over 99% of the time. If we think a site's hosting malware, we're over 99% of the time right. In the SSL case, we're not right that often because there are so many false positives. So it's very bad if people confuse the malware warning, which is very severe, with the SSL warning, which is, there's a good chance it's a false positive. But people often do confuse the two. So somebody says, I believe I got the malware warning because of some discrepancy between HTTP and HTTPS, which refers to SSL. I ignored the warning and proceeded. So, yeah, there's a lot of this like confusion of one warning with another and being insensitized to false alarms and so forth. Yep.
I was thinking, so you get a textual instruction, but many people actually read some instructions. But if you use this textual instructions, images, like I don't know, like comic style, whatever, how would it change? Because I mean, many people wouldn't read, but they would go through like action sequence represented in images. Because of the example you showed with images, it's just, I mean, it's another image, it doesn't give you any action like you should, but maybe if you explain what kind of action you can like, protect yourself, maybe it could like, it's a bit different. You see what I'm saying? It's a bit different, like, it's just the image, or image with an action, you could explain an action. Just like influence outcome.
So I think what you're suggesting is we could use a sort of take inspiration from comic books, sort of, and show like use some illustrations along with maybe a storyline about what steps a user might take, and that might be more engaging than a big paragraph of text. Yeah, I'll absolutely agree with that. We haven't done that. We haven't gotten quite that far with these warnings, although you do see we do experiment with artwork. You mentioned the policeman and the criminal. We also, if you have seen our malware warning, it's like a criminal reaching out of your laptop toward your keyboard, and it's supposed to be a sort of a threatening, scary-looking kind of picture that hopefully we hope engages people a bit to at least kind of suggest to them what's going on. It's an image, it's a pictographic way of illustrating what a phishing attack is or what a malware is, and because people often don't even know what those are, right? So I agree with your point, and I'll also say there's been some other work. Not with our warnings work, but other work within Google and within the usable security literature that suggests that what you're saying is absolutely right, that people engage much more deeply with imagery and storylines than they do with, like for example, a group did some work on presenting privacy policies, which are normally horrific legalistic documents. So people did some work in I think it was at Toronto, with illustrated privacy policies that show like pictures of what a company might do with your data, and that those were actually much easier for most end users to consume than 15-page long legalistic documents. So I think your point is a really good one. There's more experimentation to be done there. Go back there and back to James. Yeah.
Which is not about warning, this is danger, and things about more, this is totally cool. You should go forward with confidence. Like, is there anything that's inverting the
That's a really interesting question. I mean, software designers and UX designers generally hate anything that interrupts the user from the task, just engaging with the software in the way that it's supposed to be used. So when we talk with the non-security people who build the browser, or the non-security people who built Windows, for example, or Office, they hate when the security people tell them you have to put a warning here, because they say, well, I don't want the user to be interrupted. They're going to not proceed here, and I want them to use my feature. I don't want them to be scared away from my product. So I don't know. Your idea of putting up positive messages is really interesting. On the one hand, it seems like it might be interruptive, which is not usually a desirable thing. On the other hand, maybe it would give people more boosts of confidence that using this product is safe and good. I think the one example I can think of that being put in use is like antivirus software, which will sometimes tell you, hey, everything's okay. Your system's, I ran a scan and you're A-okay, and give you a green shield. And I think that's usually done for marketing the antivirus software, which is normally so silent it doesn't get the chance to speak up for itself and say how awesome it is, and so it kind of takes the chance anyway sometimes. But maybe your point is right, that users need more of these like confidence boosting things to tell you, hey, everything's A-okay, great job. Yeah, I don't know. Interesting idea. Good. Yeah, James.
The 1% of the time that you're say you warning your error of someone going to a malware site that you guys are wrong, is that
right.
Just like that hat malware that
so
you characterize when you're wrong?
Yeah. So first of all, I don't work on that aspect of the problem. That's a very different set of people than the people who do UI. I might, if I were to speculate, I think some of it's what you said, is that it's a site that has been cleaned but hasn't been, but there's a lag between the cleaning and taking it off the list. Sometimes it's probably, malware can be very tricky, and so like it has this, there's polymorphic malware, right? Like if the same vulnerability were exploited with the same code every time, it'd be very easy to detect using signature-based algorithms to detect the software and just clear it. But so that malicious software will just change itself in small ways every time, so it's not subject to this kind of signature-based detection. My guess is that we then have heuristics which try to detect that sort of polymorphic malware, and then we sometimes make mistakes. Yeah, absolutely. Right.
It just seems that these two cases are so different, and that people confusing them.
SSL and malware, yeah, right.
Such a usability issue.
Yeah.
And your design has to be so different that people can't confuse them.
Right.
In fact, I would say in the extreme, it almost seems like the malware one you should just block. And if I'm a site, I'm going to be working my butt off to get Google to get me off that list.
Yeah, and they do.
Legit.
They do, right.
And you've protected those potentially.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of want you to block them if it's real.
Yeah, okay, so I
want you to let me through on something that's real.
I want to respond to two things. So one, we are making efforts now to try to make the two warnings look very different. SSL we think should have like a yellow or orange background. We're trying to make malware and phishing be red. Maybe we should be more dramatic than that, but at least we're trying to do something. The other thing is, philosophically and legally, we don't really want to block. One is that if we falsely blocked a legit site that was actually in the 1%, right, where we flagged it wrong, that could be a big problem. What if we accidentally blocked Microsoft.com, right? That would be a serious legal problem. And it would be wrong. It would be morally wrong. Also, we don't want to be overly paternalistic with users and tell them, no, you're absolutely not allowed to have this. In some cases, we need to be a little bit more permissive, and so we need to show warnings. And so for philosophical and legal reasons, in some cases, we need to continue showing warnings and not just block. Okay, thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
What if you could just make it really hard? Like, I gotta get an SMS back to my phone, or something that requires me to actually do. See, I think something that's big about that one when you have to do the extra stuff is it's actually forcing you to think more about it. You have to, you can't just get through. You have to eat the option.